Hey, it's only me.
Before we get started, here are the trigger warnings.
So there was a time in my life when I was starved and I did steal food. There were some candy bars at school, or chocolate bars if you're English, and I did steal those. In my mind, I justified it by saying that I would pay for them eventually, but I knew in my heart that I did not have the capacity to do that. But I was so hungry. I was starving. I couldn't focus on anything and I was so tired. Oh, it takes it out of you to starve, you know. Oh, it's awful. You're so run down. You catch every illness out there. The stomach aches. I couldn't focus on anything, and I was trying very hard to strive for perfection in school because in my mind I thought, how am I going to get out of this situation? Only by doing well in school, getting into university, getting a good job, and just getting as far away as I could. And actually it did help. I live in England now, so actually it was quite a clever thing to do, but it's also almost impossible to be that hungry at school and not eat for 24 hours and still be able to sleep, get the rest that you need, and focus at school the next morning. It's impossible. I was exhausted all the time, completely, and I could almost exclusively only think about food and eating because I was starving. And nobody noticed. How did the teachers not notice that I literally never brought a lunch and never ate? Sometimes I can remember buying some chips, or like crisps if you're English. I remember buying those in school sometimes, but it was only if I could like scrape together the money, like the change. And I do remember as a very, very young child counting out pennies so that I could buy something at school, and it was literally like 100 pennies. And I remember that poor lunch lady would just cringe if she saw me in the line. She would just be cringing like, oh, you're just the girl with all the pennies. But I feel like, why didn't anyone notice that I was scrounging change together for food? And that was something that my family didn't do for me. I went and got little pennies out of where I could to be able to afford something for breakfast or lunch. And it's just, it's such a hard thing to feel like, I don't know how nobody noticed that. I never ate. I was always begging people for food. How come nobody in the school noticed that? Or if they did, why didn't they do something about it? When I was a bit older, I would say probably 15 or 16, I moved in with my dad and stepmom. Now this started a period of my life where I had food in abundance, and it was so hard for me. It was so hard to move into their house. It was so hard to see the contrast between the childhood that I had and the one that I was experiencing. There were so many emotions and so many floods of triggers, and oh, it was so hard. It was a very difficult move for me, and I felt guilty for moving. I felt selfish, but I knew in my mind that getting 3 meals a day was something that I had to do. I was starving. So I did move into their house, and food was the main reason that I made that decision. And when I moved into there, oh, I remember feeling so sick. Oh, I remember struggling so much with the food aspect. I was made breakfast, or at least cereal was set out for me, and milk, and everybody had time in the morning to sit together and have breakfast, which was a whole new experience for me. And I remember just putting enough cereal in that bowl to just cover the bottom and thinking, I don't know how I'm gonna manage this. And at first it just made me so sick and so nauseous, but I pushed myself to just have what I could without throwing up, and just to have even a few bites. And even if I couldn't manage the cereal, just to have a little bit of fruit, because that actually did kind of go down a little easier for me. And as long as I had a bite or two or something, then I was happy with that, and I felt really good about that. And then I just kind of built it up over time. Lunches were hard for me too. I finally was able to have that lunch that everybody else had, and it was so exciting. And little did I know how sick it would make me feel so awful. I mean, it's making me nauseous now thinking about it because I can really vividly remember how terrible I felt. So instead of just saying, this is hard for me, can you help me build up to the point where I could eat a normal lunch? I threw all my lunch away instead because I thought, if they know that I'm not eating this, they will stop feeding me lunch. And I'm like, I wanted it, but I could not physically eat it. So I would again do the same thing I did for breakfast. I would take a few bites of whatever I could. It was usually the yogurt I could manage. And the sandwich was just, it was so much food and meat. I felt like I wasn't used to eating all that. So it was just so hard. And eventually I did build myself up to where I could eat it. And some days I could, some days I just couldn't. And it was what it was, but it was a good feeling having somebody making lunches for me and like prioritizing me. So at least I got that experience of like somebody doing that for me. And when I went to university for the first year, my stepmom was like, do you want me to stop making you lunches? And I was like, no, don't stop making me lunches. I mean, I don't think she understood the significance of it, but for me, it was a very significant thing to do for somebody. And in that house, it wasn't taking from somebody else. Everybody had lunch. This is what you do. You eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that was it. And you eat together for the most part. So yeah, it was really hard for me to build back up to being able to eat food, but I did get there. And I think the trick was not to overdo it immediately. The trick for me was just to have a few bites, eat what you could, and stop. And I got there in the end where I could have breakfast, lunch, and dinner without feeling sick at all. And in fact, my stomach got to a point where I got used to it, and I was actually hungry. I was hungry at breakfast. I was hungry when I woke up, and I was hungry at dinner time. And it was good. It was a good feeling to get to that point, but it took years. I mean, it took ages to get there. I don't know what took me so long. It's really hard. It's much harder than you imagine. You think just eating food, you can just pick it up and eat it again, but it doesn't work that way when you've been starved for a really long time. It's hard to change that aspect of your body, especially if you have the mindset that that's just who you are and you just can't do it, then it's going to be impossible for you, really. I think it's healthier to kind of think to yourself, I can do it. And when I was younger, in my early 20s, I did go through a period of time where I did not eat. I just felt depressed and I didn't even want to live. It was like a very slow suicide. It was the first time that I went to a therapist about my childhood. I was just really depressed and I didn't want to feed my life anymore. I didn't see the point in going on. It was just so overwhelming, the feelings that you experience when you're going through it. It's like it happened to you that morning. It's so painful. It's still worth doing, don't let me put you off. But when I was going through that, I just didn't want to live anymore. I felt suicidal, but I didn't want to commit suicide. But I also didn't want to feed my life anymore. Food just became something I didn't want. I just didn't want it. I didn't want to eat. So what I would do is either not eat, or if the pain got too much or too triggering for me, the feeling of hunger, which I just said was a trigger, but apparently I had to relive, I would then eat something really terrible for you. So for example, I would go to like McDonald's and get like a burger or something that I knew would like hurt my stomach so that I wouldn't eat for the rest of the day. And I like purposely wouldn't eat. And it wasn't a fear of being fat or anything. It wasn't like an eating disorder in the traditional way. For me, I just didn't care about my life. I didn't care about my body. I just didn't even want to live. It was more like a self-harm, really. If you've ever gone to therapy or you're in therapy right now, oh, my heart just goes out to you because it's so hard. It's so hard to deal with your childhood if you've had one that's difficult. I definitely did that. It was almost impossible to go through, but I did it and I'm out the other side, and guys, it's totally worth it. Go to therapy, work on yourself. I really respect people who try very hard to deal with their childhood and become better people. Now that I am older and I'm a bit more honest about how I'm feeling, I'm in a much better place, I realize that I buy food for my children and I do let it go off rather than eat it because I want them to have it. So specifically, I'm talking about fruit mostly. I don't know what it is that I have like a mental block with fruit. If I have fruit in the house, I will refuse to eat it even if I want it. and give it to my children. And I would again rather see it go off and moldy and horrible and then feel guilty because like nobody ate it and I really did want it. But I would rather my children have the chance to eat it than eat it myself. We have plenty of food, we have plenty of money, we have plenty of resources, but I would rather eat it right before it goes off or watch it go off than think, I'm eating this, but my children should have it. I still have that mindset somehow of, if I eat it, I'm taking it from them. I'm struggling to get over it. And I know that it's there, and that's the first step to getting over something, is realizing it. But I'm just struggling to get through that one. So I'm still a bit unhealthy in that way, and I know it's something that I do need to work on. Let me know if I'm alone out here, or if you've experienced something similar, or you know someone who did. See you next time.